We're at the Open Mobile Summit. We're pleased to be joined by Ryan Koontz. He's Managing Director at Woodside Capital Partners. And Ryan, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Yeah, nice to be here.
Please tell us a little bit about your role and what tech you're backing.
Right, so essentially I'm part of an equity research group, so we market our research product to big fund managers and mutual funds, hedge funds. I'm an equity analyst. And most of our research is done really kind of at the product level as opposed to financial level. So we do a lot of product level due diligence for investors essentially on big companies.
So we're talking about TV over mobile. Where are we? I mean, it seems early days. You can do it. There are a few apps out there that get a lot of traction and some others who are trying to gain some traction, but still pretty early days. What's the latest right now, the trend you're seeing? Like, why isn't it reaching wider adoption? Is it technological? Is it sort of mindset, or is it a combination?
I think a lot of the technical barriers are really starting to fall. And I think we're coming down to business model changes, and people, the strategies from the content owners just really aren't that clear yet. And we'll see what we hear in our panel. We've got two key content owners on my panel from Turner and BET, and I think that the business models are still yet to be proven on how and what they want to get to.
And how they're going to get there. I mean, does it seem like they're worried about cannibalizing themselves on the main screen, or are they just trying to duplicate onto a smaller screen?
Well, I think they certainly are taking lessons from the music industries and other people that have fought the change, and I think they're open and evolving, but it's a pretty complicated issue with regards to legal rights and distribution rights and those sort of things, and understanding what the strategy looks like. I think it depends on what your content is as to what your strategy is going to be to take it on mobile.
And how does the whole cord cutting issue come into play here? I mean, are we talking about supplanting cable or broadcast networks with content over mobile? Is it always going to be a second screen? Or one day, not too far down the line, it won't really matter where you're watching it?
Well, right now I feel like it's a backdrop concern that's always there, but they're not afraid of it. They're definitely moving forward with their strategies, and it depends on essentially how powerful of a franchise you are. If you're ESPN, you're probably not that concerned about corporate cord cutting. I mean, you could go direct to consumer if you need to. Whereas a lot of the other content owners, well, I think they really have to keep their bread buttered and be careful about the cord cutting availability, making everything available online.
Right, and cable fees are certainly lining their pockets at the moment, maybe more so than if you're not a household name like ESPN.
Truly.
Which in a lot of ways they're supplementing what they're showing, not supplanting their main offerings by ESPN3 and smaller events that have more of a niche audience.
Yeah.
But not everyone can really do that. So do they have to make a choice, or are they going to just try and add?
Well, I think they look at it so they've got essentially a wall up, an authentication wall up, and they'll make some content available free of charge. Maybe it's limited, maybe it's a few shows, some teasers, and then they'll have an authentication wall up. So if you're an authenticated subscriber through a satellite or cable provider or a telco, then you'll have access to their entire content base, which won't necessarily be everything, but I think over time it starts to look more and more like a true video on demand archive.
It seemed to be an issue for the providers, though, with consumers really wanting a lot more speed and consuming so much more bandwidth. Yeah. Now, LTE has been one technology that's sort of bandied as alleviating some of these concerns, but still a bottleneck issue right now.
Truly, I mean, today's LTE networks, I mean, my background's probably more in networking than it is in the user application level, and the LTE networks that are built out there, they're still pretty skinny. There's coverage, but not necessarily capacity in the dense areas, and they're still investing tons of money, even though these big carriers are claiming 200 million plus pops. They still have a lot of work to do to light up a lot of towers.
Well, on that issue, can they offset that with some of the data mining, or maybe they do toll-free and they have partners, ESPN helps to pay some of the freight for hogging the bandwidth?
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole pay-per-use, and you will definitely continue to see the whole metered approach to billing around broadband data for sure. Yeah. And video will be a big consumer of that, and people will start to be concerned about how much are they using and on what kind of network are they watching it on.
And you talk about the 4G and the LTE networks that are being built out, but skinny networks in urban areas, but if you're not in one of the major urban areas, in some cases it hasn't reached you yet. So when do we see this more pervasive network, or is it going to be? Are they relying on different technologies to try and fill in the gaps between the towers?
Well, I think out in the rural areas, LTE does have an advantage of reaching farther at the lower frequency band. So I don't think that coverage is going to be that big of an issue. I really see it, the issue becomes more around capacity. And things like in-building reach is not talked about very much, but these buildings weren't designed to propagate radio waves.
Right. And what about stadiums? I mean, that becomes an issue.
Yeah, huge issue. They're talking about these distributed antenna systems, which are exploding these days in terms of demand, and they're pushing a lot of, they're able to push spectrum into the stadium essentially with these distributed antenna systems. To make capacity available.
Well, and it's easier maybe on some of the newer stadiums too. I mean, you hear about the 49ers' new stadium being totally wired, but then you look at the Dodgers, they're having to retrofit Dodger Stadium, and you can imagine the outlays and the challenges there are much more difficult than building something ground up.
For sure. The older buildings have an issue, and there's newer technologies coming down the pipe that are going to basically make that a much easier transition, things like small cells.
Yeah. What about, we see the TV, as I was mentioning, sort of, it's on the bigger screen now. You've got a lot of screens. How close are we to watching whatever you want, wherever you want, and whenever you want? And who is the gatekeeper there?
Well, I feel like we're probably in like the second inning of the game. It's pretty early. The gatekeepers still remain the content guys, and there's a little bit of finger pointing going around, like this, as far as is the bandwidth really there to deliver it anyway versus what I make available, and what's the business model look like, and the whole digital rights issues around this stuff. The technology issues I finally feel are pretty close to being resolved. I think we'll see some big hurdles passed in the next 12 to 24 months. And then it really comes down to legal and business dollars that are going to drive this.
So what do you think the biggest hurdle is to getting the business dollars there for the content guys to make the leap?
Advertising, right? I mean, really being able to monetize content on the fly, understand that target consumer, things like Nielsen ratings for mobile, and that's going to come along. There were some recent announcements in the last few weeks about Nielsen making a move into this, and to be able to monetize, you got to be able to point to some numbers. And so, we're still in the early game of this whole ecosystem really being fleshed out, but the technology is just about there.
Yeah, and it's just about there, and you can look at this, because certainly when someone's watching at home, you sort of have an idea who it is, but when they're watching on a tablet or your phone, unless it's maybe the spouse or the child who has the phone, but you have a very certain identity of who's watching it.
Sure, yeah. Targeted advertising is ripe here. You can resell that same ad slot thousands of times. So pretty powerful opportunity.
How far down the line do you think, though? You said second inning. Is this a quick game or is this a long game?
For targeted ads, we're probably still a couple of years, 2-3 years away.
Yeah.
For that really going mainstream, but we'll start to see that on things like video on demand titles. I think we'll see that now, essentially, in some of the early deployments.
All right. Well, Ryan Koontz from Woodside Capital Partners, thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.